Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Gordon Smith, and I'm joined as usual by co-host Jay Shabbat. In part one, we assess the impact from a rapidly developing situation in the Middle East. And in part two, we review the latest earnings from Qantas and Virgin Australia. Hi, Jay. Usually at this point in the show, I say, how are you doing? But it's been a tough old week for the airline industry.
Yeah, it sure has. A lot of drama. And, as I always say, it's airlines are always on the front lines of bad news. And whether it be, wars or pandemics or recessions or natural disasters, it's airlines are kind of always on the front lines. They're always hit first.
Sometimes we kind of jest that the calendar gods are not always with us. When we have, for example, earnings on a Thursday and we're speaking on a Tuesday, etc. But that's sort of a conventionally fluid situation. This is completely different in terms of scale, in terms of scope, in terms of seriousness. So we are very, very mindful of the fact that by the time you listen to this, when it is published on Thursday, the situation will have inevitably changed. But as Jay says, this is as it stands. Tuesday afternoon, my time, Tuesday morning with Jay on Tuesday, March the 3rd. And if you have been under a rock and you just need a very, very quick catch up, obviously the airspace around the Middle East was shut down Saturday, February 28th, after the US and Israel attacked Iran with dozens of airstrikes. Iran responded with assaults on countries with US bases. Since then, the situation has in some ways stabilized, and in other ways, it's actually deteriorated quite nastily. We've had high-profile incidents in the UAE, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere. There are a lot of factors at play, but for the purposes of the Airline Weekly Lounge, we are going to be just shamelessly focused on the airline industry. So we're not being flippant here, but we are just focusing on what we know best. A quick update on where we are in terms of the airlines, and we are mindful again that there are many, many smaller carriers affected, but just for the sake of clarity and brevity, the big three, Emirates, all flights remain suspended until 23:59 hours UAE time on the 4th of March. There are a limited number of repatriation and freighter flights scheduled, but they are the extreme exception. Also, Etihad Airways coming out of Abu Dhabi, everything remains suspended there again until 2 p.m. UAE time on the 4th of March. Again, with a handful of exceptions, but all scheduled operations still suspended. And Qatar Airways, not even having any repatriation stuff at the moment, everything temporarily suspended due to the closure of Qatari airspace. A further update, they say, will be provided on the 4th of March at 9 a.m. Doha time, Jay. So a very, very quick scene setter there. What was your initial impression? Because we have had flare-ups in the Middle East, not wanting to trivialize it too much, but we have had spikes in violence, in conflict. And this was obviously an escalation that we frankly expected to be coming. We have had the mood music in Washington and in Israel ramping up in recent weeks around the situation in Iran, but it is still very, very, very disruptive, and it does feel different.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the fact that the busiest international airport in the world is basically closed, that in itself smacks of, feeling different. So obviously this is more serious than any of the recent episodes of unrest. Even if you think about the Russia-Ukraine war, which was rather disruptive to the airline industry. We'll talk about some of the other shocks to the industry, geopolitical shocks to the industry in a bit. But never have we had such important hubs just completely closed. And again, if we probably low likelihood of this, but if the conflict eases over, the next week or 2 weeks, it's possible that the airline industry at large could, escape this episode without too much financial damage. But the more likely case is that this conflict's going to extend over at least a couple of weeks, perhaps a couple months. Who knows? These things can, go longer than anybody expects. So if that's the case, Then you start to look at some very, very serious risks to the industry. And let me just back up and just to frame the setting here, I want everybody to just be aware that 2023, 2024, and 2025 were all very well, I shouldn't use the word very because this is the airline industry. The airline industry never
It's all relative.
Yeah, it's all relative. But in terms of being for by airline standards, these 3 years are very healthy, profitable years, some of the most profitable years ever. And again, we're talking collectively here, so you can pick any individual airline and talk about how those 3 years were not profitable at all. And what I'm talking about, if you just add up, all the profits for all the airlines worldwide, it's been a pretty good 3 years. And IATA going into 2026, these are I'm using data from IATA here to when I speak about the industry being collectively profitable. IATA forecasted that 2026 was going to be an even better year than 2025. And if you think about the reasons why the industry has been rather successful the past couple of years coming out of the pandemic, you can point to the just the worldwide tourism industry has been strong in most parts of the world. You had a lot of business traffic recovering. The global economy, it hasn't been gangbusters by any means, but there's been decent growth. I mean, it hasn't been a recession or anything globally. And then, of course, we've had these ongoing aircraft capacity shortages, which have been frustrating for airlines, but have also the fact that there's just been less supply than demand that has helped airlines financially in the aggregate. And you can, there are other reasons too. I think cargo markets have been more resilient than people expected, and, et cetera, et cetera. Fuel has been lower than, airlines probably feared. So that's been very helpful as well. But now we're presented here, early 2026 with what's going on in the Middle East. We're presented with the possibility of what, in my mind, I'm thinking of as a potential triple shock and maybe even a quadruple shock. And let me go through some of these risks that I'm thinking about. So, the first of these shocks is just the obvious one, a fuel shock. So I was looking today, the price of oil, and I'm just using WTI. That's a benchmark. Some airlines might use the Brent benchmark, but it doesn't really matter. They basically move in similar fashion. So WTI this morning, last I checked about an hour ago, was at $76 a barrel. Who knows what it'll be by the time everybody's listening to this on Thursday or Friday, but 76 right now. In mid-December, it was 55. So you can get a sense that already, and not all of that increase happened just in the past couple of days since this weekend, since the conflict began, since the Iran conflict began. Some of that was in the run-up to, I think, as you mentioned it, Gordon, I don't think this was a total surprise. I think there was I think a lot of people expected that this conflict might happen. So in any case, we have that potential fuel shock. We'll see how long it lasts. And then on top of that, a second possible shock is a demand shock. And again, we don't know how extensive that could or would be, but you have to ask the questions, are people canceling trips right now? Are they, if you're even in the United States, are you not going to Europe this summer because you're worried about the things you're seeing on the news? If you're if you're going to the Middle East, I mean, are you canceling your trip? At this point, probably yes, or at least postponing your booking. And remember the timing of all this. This is happening at a very, very prime time for peak summer bookings. So if you think about, June, July, August being very peak travel months for most of the world, a lot of those bookings are happening basically now. It might be a little bit early, maybe some of it's going to happen in April, whatever. But we're already, here we are early March, so we're already getting into that sort of prime booking period. So that's problematic. And yeah, you start to ask yourself, if you're United Airlines and Delta Airlines and you've been loving life the last couple of years because international has been so strong, well, does that whole script start to flip? And now maybe the domestic markets start to boom and all these low cost carriers start to do better. Again, all this very, very preliminary, very, very theoretical, hypothetical. I just raised the points. These are things that I'm sure airlines are thinking about now. So I mentioned two possible shocks: a fuel shock, a demand shock. Another one is just the infrastructure shock. I mean, we see what happened with Dubai Airport and Abu Dhabi Airport and all these very important hub airports in the Gulf region. But don't forget also that a lot of that airspace is now closed too. And some of that, is very important airspace for, connecting a lot of really important markets. Remember that we already have Russian airspace closed to many airlines, and we already have, airspace above other regions, conflict regions, and whether it's East Africa or Pakistan, Afghanistan closed as well. So, how long do these airports close? I don't know, but don't dismiss the infrastructure shock here. And then a fourth possible shock would be an economic shock. Will there be a recession from this? Obviously, if oil spikes to, well above $100, then who knows? I mean, you start to get into a 2022 scenario where, oil goes up to somewhere around 100, and then you start to get, serious bouts of inflation in most countries. And, who knows what happens? You could see GDP, global GDP reverse go negative. So yeah, very, very gloomy scenarios that I'm painting here, but obviously something that the industry is thinking about with the events that are unfolding as we speak. So I've said enough there. I'll turn it back to you, Gordon, if you have anything else to say about any of that.
Yeah, Jay, I've been looking at the UK press, which I'm more exposed to, but also more broadly the European press. And one of the questions here is what's happening to airfares for those airlines that are still operating, because it's important to stress that we've got the big Middle East 3 out of action, but certainly as we stand here on March the 3rd, Oman Air still operating okay. Saudi, a lot of stuff still coming in and out of there. Obviously, the network's not nearly what you've got at Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways, but there are still options for consumers who need to get from A to B. Let's use that aged example of London to Australia. Is there any sort of indication that airlines could actually have a bit of a profit spike in the short term while you've got all of this demand taken out of the system because you don't have the Middle East big 3 and they are really serving a very, very captive market now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, anytime you have market disruptions, you're going to have this airline or that airline that's well placed to opportunistically benefit. We even saw that one of the most profitable airlines in the world for a couple of quarters last year was Israel's El Al, because, I mean, you wouldn't think that because there was, if you think about the Gaza war that lasted a couple of years, and then think about the conflict, Israel's attack on Iran, which was, I think, last June, where they're basically, I mean, Tel Aviv was basically a closed market for a while. They actually profited. They actually showed very, very strong profits. The reason being is that all their competitors left, and they were pretty much the only ones operating in the market for a long time. So yes, of course. I mean, I just you make the point there. I think it's a good one that there are some airlines that, for better or for worse, can benefit from a crisis or profit from a crisis. There's that's just the way it is, but. Will that, compensate for the larger impact on the industry? I mean, no, I don't think there's anyone who wish for something like this. Remember too that, okay, yeah, maybe you're some airline that could charge exorbitantly, to get to Australia from Europe, but you're also going to be dealing with higher fuel costs. So you're not totally out of the woods. And also too, you have to be and El Al from Israel ran into this trouble too, is that when you start to charge too much, you're going to get pushback from regulators you're going to get pushback from customers. So, it's like the gas station that starts jacking up rates during a hurricane or something like that. It's you can maybe make a quick buck, but you're not going to make too many friends in the process. So, all these things have to be considered when you're the only airline or one of just a few airlines to get people to where they need to go. So yeah, I hope that answers your questions, but it's
yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
It's a good point though that you make.
Yeah, I think any short-term profiteering is going to be more than cancelled out just by the overall disruption. Any carrier that can get you adequately from A to B in our previous example is going to be adversely affected. So I'm sure, not to name any particular airlines, I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouths, but let's assume that as an airline that maybe has some Southeast Asian destinations from Europe, they're probably going to have some Middle East destinations that are being absolutely hammered just now with all sorts of messy refunds and compensation claims and operational disruptions. So completely agree that very, very few people will be relishing this situation even if you just look at it from a pure profitability point of view. The headwinds are certainly going to be there, but certainly the tailwinds as well, Jay. A bit of a mixed bag. And you're just looking at some of the numbers here. An Emirates A380 can sit up to 615 passengers in that 2-class configuration. And Emirates alone serves the UK with 146 weekly all wide-body services. Not all of those A380s, not all of those that super dense 2 configuration A380, but it is just an unreal amount of capacity that is being temporarily taken out of the system. So, when we are talking about being able to rebook passengers, we are talking about hundreds of thousands that are affected. And particularly when, every time it feels like we look at load factors, they are boasting that it's going to be 85%, 86%, 87%. There's not a lot of empty seats here to accommodate the passengers that have been affected onto scheduled services. So it does stress the need for extra flights, repatriation flights, larger aircraft, which will take days, if not weeks, to get really, really something back to approaching normality, Jay. So it's an incredibly messy situation. But what I would say, I shared this on LinkedIn yesterday, is that Gulf airlines are better prepared than most, I would say, in terms of just a resilient. I don't know. I was tempted there to call it state backing, and that obviously has a different meanings depending on your point of view. But I would say that certainly the UAE and Qatar, these examples that we're discussing here today, you really do get the impression that there is a sort of Team UAE and Team Qatar element to it, and nobody, any stakeholder in any of those two countries wants their airlines to do badly, and by association the airports and everything else, they want to see normality resumed as soon as possible. So you do get the impression that everything state level down is going to be invested in making sure that when the time comes to get aircraft back in the sky in a meaningful way, they are going to be throwing absolutely everything at a state level and beyond at getting everything back to normal. It's going to be quite something to watch.
This does come at a time when, remember, the Russia-Ukraine war is still ongoing. Russian airspace is closed still to, U.S. airlines and European airlines, Japanese airlines, Korean airlines. So that is still a major disruption. Then don't forget you have this China-Japan dispute, which is very strongly impacting traffic flows between those two countries. You have this Canada-U.S. tensions, which I never thought I'd ever say those words, but here we are. And Canada-U.S. Traffic flows are very much disrupted. So Canadians are visiting, Canadian tourists in particular, are visiting U.S. in much fewer numbers. We have the kind of general decline in visitation to the U.S., whether it be tourism or even students. And we've talked about this several times, Gordon, you and I, about carriers like KLM and Turkish Airlines not seeing as much tourism flow, student traffic flow into the United States. We have that. We have some of that going on between Mexico, too. We saw a downturn in Mexico, U.S. traffic last year. I think we heard from Volaris last week that that traffic has mostly recovered. But you can see my point. There's a lot of ongoing things, and I can go on. There's nobody's going to Cuba right now because they have fuel shortages, so their tourism is disrupted. And we have the China-U.S. traffic is still very depressed because of a very, very highly restrictive bilateral. We have wars in East Africa, Pakistan, Afghan conflict. So you can go on. And so when you'll hear airlines talk about geopolitical disruptions, they're being serious. I mean, it's you can almost say that always. I mean, there's never been any year in in airline history when there hasn't been the threat of geopolitical disruptions, but it does seem like the risk and the realities are pretty it's pretty significant right now. I guess we should say that there are some examples of geopolitical conflicts maybe receding a bit, and to the point where airlines have had opportunities to restart flights. And Syria comes to mind. There's an airline in Kuwait called Jazeera Airways. They're a low-cost carrier, and they mentioned how their flights to Damascus are performing extremely well, and that so much so that they might actually go to Aleppo now, which is another Syrian city. So there are some examples where markets have reopened. Maybe Venezuela, American Airlines has talked about going back in there. We'll see. But these are obviously exceptions. The geopolitical environment right now, the landscape is rather tense and rather risk heavy for airlines, I'll say.
For sure. There was a moment there, Jay, I thought you were going to slip into an aviation version of Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire," sort of reeling off all of the various conflict zones, but also just areas of disturbed passenger flows, I think is a good way to describe it. Because
nice, yeah, that's a good phrasing.
I didn't want to use the word turbulence because that's just so overused in this industry.
Little trite, but yeah. Your phraseology was good. I like it.
Yeah. And obviously, there's a very real human impact, and we're just discussing here the financials and the airline,
of course,
very siloed view of this. But we hope you'll forgive that, and the Airline Weekly Lounge and our thoughts are going with everyone, but in terms of an operational point of view, logistical point of view, and obviously the human cost of what's unfolding in the Middle East and elsewhere. Jay, don't go anywhere. In part two, we're going to be discussing Australia, Qantas and Virgin Australia, to be precise. But before that, quick reminder to send any questions or comments that you might have for us to podcasts@skift.com. That's podcast with an S at the end. Please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you are enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can continue to spread the word about the Airline Weekly Lounge. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Before we head into the break, we're joined by a skifter that you might not be so familiar with, and that's Adam Stacey. He's a senior editorial events and awards producer. Whew, that's a big title. And he's currently working on the Skift Idea Awards. Adam, welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge.
Thank you very much. Glowing introduction.
For the benefit of listeners who aren't familiar with the Idea Awards, what are they all about?
Yeah, so Skift Idea Awards, we're just moving into our 8th year. So the awards were launched really to recognize and celebrate the most impactful ideas across travel, just the entire ecosystem. But I like to think of them as the travel industry's innovation benchmark. We all know we're at the pivotal moment of transformation for the industry, structurally, technologically, operationally. And these are awards about spotlighting the companies and leaders who are actually driving that change. So, I'm talking about things like advancements in customer experience, AI, digital transformation, sustainability, product design, all that good stuff. And what's important with the awards as well is that it's not necessarily about scale. So we're open to everyone because our focus is about impact. So we see submissions from startups, mid-sized players, global brands, individual leaders. I always like to think innovation doesn't correlate with the size of the company. It correlates with the execution and the results that they're putting out. And that's what we are recognizing with these awards.
Totally agree. Sometimes it helps if you're a little bit more nimble, a bit smaller. You can be a little bit more disruptive than a very large corporation. But what would you say, Adam, to an Airline Weekly Lounge listener who says, that all sounds great, but where do I fit in?
Yeah. And I'm not an airline expert, so I'm not going to tell people what to do. But I think for this audience, we have an obvious category, which is airlines and airports. Is specifically designed for that industry. That could cover anything from cabin innovation, distribution strategies, emerging advanced air mobility. We're seeing all this stuff with flying taxis and this crazy stuff. But we also have categories specifically for technology. So, this industry specifically is deep into AI deployment. We're focusing on revenue optimization, workforce planning, retail transformation, data-driven personalization, and sustainability as well. That's another area where this industry is focused on. So fleet strategy, emissions tracking, new planes, all that stuff. So we're looking for initiatives really that just demonstrate tangible progress and are bettering the experience for the end user and the industry as a whole.
Sounds great. And if anyone's still unsure, I believe you got a quiz as well.
We do. Our marketing team, I like to call them the best in the biz. They've come up with a quiz that you answer a couple of questions and the quiz will tell you basically which categories are the best fit.
Amazing.
One new thing we've launched this year as well is that you can actually download a sample form before you submit. So, if you're entering on behalf of a client maybe, or you're not quite sure what the submission forms looks like, you can just download a PDF sample and take a look in advance.
Super, super helpful. Okay, you've got everyone interested. What is the call to action? Where do they go next if they want to apply or learn a little bit more?
Yeah, so the next step is to just head to the website, which is hostedonlive.skift.com, and then you just follow through to Idea Awards. As you mentioned, we've got a quiz. You'll find all of the categories, the sample PDFs, judges, previous winners, if you're curious to see who's made it in the past, and all of the relevant timelines. The submission process is very straightforward and streamlined. It's all done remotely via our online system. You can buy now at the lowest rate and continue to edit up until the entry deadline in July. So there's no, huge time commitment there. And one thing I would say is even if you're unsure about whether your project or initiative would qualify, is worth exploring. Some, from speaking to past winners, some of the most compelling have come from projects that they didn't think would be a good fit, and then they've gone on to win. So yeah, if you've got a smart solution that solves a real world problem, take a look. We'd love to hear.
Take a look. Fantastic. Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again for coming on the show, Adam, and telling us all about it. And I can speak for myself. For the Global Forum in New York last September, we got to see for ourselves many of the Idea Awards winners, and they are from right across the industry. It's not always who you might expect. So yeah, do check that website out, live.skift.com, where you find all the details for the Idea Awards. Just scroll down to the bottom of the page. You'll get all the info there. Thanks to Adam for joining us on the show, and listeners, hang around because we'll be talking IAG right after this short break. Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm Gordon Smith, joined as usual by co-host Jay Shabbat. Part 1, we were discussing the unfolding situation in the Middle East. Part 2, we are going to be turning our attention to Australia, Jay, because we had the numbers from both Virgin Australia and Qantas in recent days. Let's just bring it right back to the basics. Headline numbers. What do our listeners need to know?
Okay, sure. And the kind of Surgeon General's warning here is that these results, as you said, Gordon, they were published last week. So before the Iran conflict began. So there was no mention of that in any of these earnings calls here that we're talking about. So we are talking about the July to December period of 2025. So the last half of the calendar year. These airlines in Australia report just twice a year, semi-annually. And the good news is that they're pretty detailed. They kind of break out how, particularly Qantas, how domestic versus international performing. We'll talk about that in a second. But the bad news, they only go twice a year, not quarterly. So, that's what it is. So we'll take it. But Qantas had a very, very good second half. They had a good full year too. Their operating margin was 12%. And again, the the big profit center for them is that Australian domestic market. Every now and then there's airlines that think they can compete with Qantas and Virgin, and the latest being Bonza, and there was another one called Rex, and it never works out. And those two are gone.
There was another one that didn't even get off the ground. I think Koala Airlines.
Okay, yeah, Koala. I don't even think I heard that one. It wasn't there. Was that the 777 Partners one? I can't remember, but yeah, you're right. There's always people thinking that, hey, I can make a go in it. If Qantas is making 16% operating margins domestically, which is what they reported, hey, I can take a piece of that pie also. But yeah, it never works out. Qantas was very strong domestically, and Jetstar as well. That's the low cost affiliate of Qantas, just doing very, very well domestically. I don't have those numbers in front of me. If you look at their earnings presentation, they even break that out as well. I think it might be in our feature story in Airline Weekly that just came out on Monday, so you can look at that. But yeah, domestic is doing very, very well. I'll flip over to Virgin for a second, and then we'll come back to Qantas. But Virgin actually did very, very well also. For those same 6 months, they actually had a 15% margin, so they beat Qantas by about 3 points, which you never would have seen that pre-pandemic. Virgin was always in trouble. And now they've really turned themselves around thanks to their bankruptcy restructuring. And I think, talked about, that whole restructuring in the past. But just very briefly, they just became a simpler airline. They pulled a lot of their international, long-haul international stuff. No more flying 777s. No more flying, A330s with business class across the continent. And it's a much simpler airline. They're focused on what they do best, which is, short haul, some premium, but not like super premium catering to, big corporates. So, you probably get some of that too. But anyway, Virgin Australia doing very, very, very well now. Very profitable loyalty program, by the way. So does Qantas. So those loyalty programs contribute a lot to the earnings of these carriers. Let's go back to Qantas for a minute, though, because this is kind of a perennial, I don't even want to call it a problem, because their international operations, and I'm specifically talking about their Qantas branded international operations, although what I'm about to say kind of applies to Jetstar too, they're international, but Qantas branded international, their operating margin for the second calendar half of last year was just 6%. So about half what the total company is doing. So that's something, is 6% anything to, should they go out and bury their head in sand? No, not at all. I mean, 6% is totally respectable, but they obviously would like to get that higher. And so during their earnings call, the management team, led now by CEO Vanessa Hudson, spoke at length about some of the things that they're trying to do to improve their international profitability. And I'm actually going to let you, one of the very, very big ones, I'm going to let you talk about, Gordon, because you've researched this extensively. And if you have not read Gordon's very in-depth feature story on Project Sunrise, which was last fall,
I think I've got a wrinkle under my eye for every month I was working on it. So it's about 4 or 5 days. Yeah, it was last November. We published just before the Skift Aviation Forum. And that was just when I think we had the Project Sunrise aircraft revealed at the Airbus final assembly line. Obviously, it's going under its final, dotting the I's, crossing the T's over in Europe. And then it will be flowing down to Australia. It's a specially modified A350.
Yeah, so definitely, if you haven't read that already, it's probably on the Airline Weekly website, maybe even on the Skiff website. Make sure to do that. But tell everybody, what is Project Sunrise, and why is that seen as kind of a weapon for Qantas to get their international margins improved?
Well, I mean, timely. I mean, the ability to cut out the middleman in the Middle East. Certainly, we have the opportunity here to fly from Sydney to London and Sydney to New York as the two sort of classic examples with this new aircraft, non-stop. And of course, a pedant may say, well, Qantas already flies direct from Sydney to London, but it is going via Singapore. So this is going to be cutting out any of the intermediary stops with this special modified aircraft, premium heavy. You might remember back in even the Alan Joyce era that there was a lot of noise about Project Sunrise, even pre-pandemic, and obviously we all know what happened next. But the project is really gaining traction. It's going to be 12 A350s, and when you look at the number of aircraft they've got, the number of Australian cities, the number of non-Australian destinations that they could put it to, it does suggest that Melbourne and maybe even Brisbane might be in the mix there as well. And this is not completely without any sort of prior trial. You do have not just the Project Sunrise research flights, which were operated by the Dreamliner, back with a very, very light load factor, but just proving that it could be done. There are real, tangible, day in, day out flights from Perth to London and to Paris, and seasonal route as well to Rome. And you speak to any Qantas executive, you speak to any passenger, the feedback on those is really, really good. They're profitable, the NPS scores are strong, and it seems to be a bit of a win-win. The broader point, and that's sort of getting down to a consumer side of things, is do you really want to be sitting on an aircraft for what would be 21, 22 hours when you could stretch your legs in a hub airport on the way? That's not really for me to say. That will come down to the individual, but there will be certainly plenty of people, I think, that just want to get the flight out of the way, particularly if you're in one of the nicer premium cabins and you've got the opportunity to have a nice meal, have a glass of Aussie Shiraz, and then kick back into your lie flat suite and then wake up in London or New York. There's plenty more detail in my feature, but I think the skeptics are thinking, yes, I think we discussed, is it the Jeff Goldblum, the Jurassic Park metaphor? Just because they could, they never asked themselves whether they should. That would be potentially a risk. Yes, we've got this amazing aircraft. Let's just put it here without thinking about it. Of course, that's not how any airline revenue manager or anyone else, network planner, considers it, let alone Qantas, who are relatively risk averse, I would suggest. They have crunched the numbers and they are pretty confident that this will work. There will clearly be a premium attached to this versus other one-stop options. And Qantas is at pains to stress that this is not going to be a case of no longer flying Singapore and then London, and obviously the very extensive JV with Emirates is going to continue as well. This is going to be adding an additional option for Qantas passengers, carving out more of that premium traffic that really wants to get on the way quickly. But you still expect to have those one-stop options, which are very, very well established and still quite popular.
Yeah, great overview of that. So yeah, that's coming. Did you say 2027? Right, is going to be the.
I think they're due to get the aircraft in the next few months, but then you would expect plenty of sort of local testing with Qantas and crew familiarization and everything else. Plus, you want to open the booking windows reasonably early for a long haul flight like that, ultra long haul flight. So yeah, I think we're probably looking at 27 before anything's in the sky in terms of meaningful commercial service.
Yeah, so they're very bullish on that, as you explained. They really think that's going to increase their international profitability quite a bit. And it'll be, it's only those, how many planes did you say? I just forgot. Was it 12?
12 A350s, yeah.
Yeah, the 12 A350s. So yeah, that's quite a bit of capacity. But they, say that's going to have a meaningful impact. They actually gave a statistic here, or call it an anecdote, whatever. But they said that on their Brisbane to Los Angeles route, I don't know what they were flying earlier, but they swapped in a 787-9, and suddenly their profit margins increased 15%. So you can see these new aircraft are extremely valuable. In fact, Vanessa Hudson they asked her, like, what happens if you start to see demand weakness? Are you going to cancel some of these orders? You still have some more 87s on order. You got the A350 1000s on order, etc. And said, no. These, like, under any circumstances, these are, going to be valuable to us. And of course, all bets are off if there's a giant recession or some demand shock related to what's going on, what we talked about earlier. But, in general, they really find these planes very useful. So that is, fleet renewal is another, like, just very big aspect of their plan to increase international profitability. And then kind of related to that, the new international planes, and I should also add that they're getting these Airbus XLRs.
Oh,
too,
yes.
which are going to be used in mainline, I believe. So Jetstar has the A320 LRs, the long range, but then the XLRs, which have just all that, a little bit of extra range, those are going to be mainline. I want to say one of their early routes is it Brisbane to Manila, or maybe it's Melbourne to Manila? Can't remember, but they're doing that kind of stuff into Southeast Asia. So new aircraft, very helpful. Not just the wide bodies, also the A321s. And then they are, particularly back on the wide body side, they're going to be very heavily configured with premium. So that's another reason that they really think that the margins can increase. They see it, right now they're flying nonstop with the 787-9s from Perth to Europe. So they do Rome, Paris, and London.
Yes.
Which geographically they can do. They can't do Europe from Sydney or Melbourne. That's why they need the A350-1000s. But the 787-9s are doing Perth, and they don't give exact details on what their margins, but they seem to say that these are very, very successful routes thanks to very, very strong premium demand. So these planes come in. I mean, they said point blank that right now on international, the demand for premium exceeds the supply for premium, the supply of their seats. So that will be helpful. They are adding a couple of new routes. They've been kind of quiet on the, kind of adding new, big, sexy long haul routes over the past couple of years, other than the Perth flying, which, some of that has been in the past couple of years. They are actually adding kind of an interesting one. They're doing Las Vegas, but for only about, it's like 2.5 months. They're going to do it starting, I think it starts like Christmas Eve, and it goes for January when you have that big, what do they call it? The consumer?
Yeah, the Consumer Electronics Show.
Yes.
CES.
CES. You'll be able to get to there, so that they'll have it, overlapping with that. And then it extends into February. So they'll give that a try. But they are, this is kind of separate to this. They are moving some capacity, some A380 capacity out of the US they're going to put some back in Singapore, for example. They said the US, Australia to the US going, what is that? That would be westbound, right? I get confused.
Australia to the US? That's east.
Well, if you're going to California, you're going over the Pacific. It gets confusing. So I'll trust you, whatever you say. But
you're going to arrive jet lagged either way.
Yeah, either way, exactly. You'll be as confused as I am right now. But so yeah, you're going from the people going from Australia as tourists, to you. That's what's a little bit soft right now to the US. If you really want to just talk about the Australian demand picture in general, you also want to talk about the big domestic market. And there, things are pretty healthy. I think Qantas said that corporate demand, kind of big corporate demand, little bit soft, but small and medium-sized businesses are traveling. That's robust. The big mining, Australia has a very big mining economy that they said is doing well. A lot of people flying out to Western Australia, to, Brisbane's got a lot of coal and the gold mining. I mean, if you see the price of gold in the last year or two, it's gone through the roof. And
I've sold all my rings.
Yeah. And no wonder, where are your rings, Gordon? I was looking for them. Yeah.
Still the gold tooth.
You got the gold tooth still in there? Okay,
saving that for the big payday. Yeah.
Yeah. Leave that in there. You'll have some trouble eating. You sell those. I don't want to see anywhere near pawn shops. And so the gold miners are doing very well, flying a lot on Qantas, on Virgin. So, and leisure is doing very well. I mean, Jetstar captures a lot of that domestically. So yeah, that's Australia. And like we said earlier, at this point, we're just kind of, hoping for the best. Hopefully things quiet down in the Middle East. Hopefully, we'll get a better picture of what airlines are thinking, like I said, over the next, certainly next couple of days as more airlines report, including Lufthansa and Turkish. And then, in the weeks and months ahead, we obviously will be following this very closely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And our thoughts with listeners and everyone else affected by the situation in the Middle East and elsewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You want to wrap up the show with a few numbers, Jay? I know our listeners like numbers. Las Vegas becomes the 101st destination on the Qantas network.
101. Okay.
101, albeit seasonal, like you said. The airline's 8th city across North and South America, joining the likes of LA, San Francisco, Honolulu, Dallas, New York, Vancouver, and Santiago. Santiago is the cool one that goes over the South Pacific. Always wanted to try that one. And then some of the numbers. Yeah, that'd be a fun one. Some of the numbers around the XLR. They're getting 28 XLRs, that initial batch, as direct replacements for the existing Boeing 737s. And on the Project Sunrise aircraft, I knew when you were discussing just how premium heavy those are. I've got the numbers up here from my feature. 6 first-class suites, 52 business suites, a whopping 40 in premium economy, and 140 seats in economy. So very, very light, just 238 passengers there across what's essentially an A350-1000. So bearing in mind when you've got like French B and others that can pack up to sort of 400, 480 into that same aircraft, it's still going to be comfortable. It's still going to be comfortable.
Oh, sorry to cut you off there, but you said 238. And immediately the number that came to mind, doesn't Wizz Air fit Frontier, a few other 240 on their A321 NEOs?
I know where I'd rather be. Yeah, some incredible numbers there, and obviously we're
gonna try that flight. You're gonna one day think you'd like to, if you had the opportunity, would you get on that super long haul Project Sunrise?
Not in economy.
Not in the economy.
No. I'll sell my gold teeth and going first.
There you go.
There we go. Ken Wallace, if you're listening, book me in for the first one. 2 gold teeth, please. There we go. Okay.
Maybe Qantas will have a feature on their website where you could just do that online. You can try to execute that gold tooth sale online. The transaction, they'll send someone over to extract it. And
teethfortickets.com. There you go. Get your domain registered now.
Teeth for tickets. That would perfect.
There we go. Okay. We've run a little over this week, but it's a podcast and we had some big stories to discuss. So hope you forgive us, listeners. We'll try and keep it a little tighter next week. But Jay, very, very quick look at what's in the next issue of Airline Weekly. I dare say the Middle East is going to have a bit of an impact there.
Yeah, still kind of sorting out exactly how we'll present the feature of the week, but it will likely be discussing some of those, that triple, quadruple risk factor that I talked about earlier.
Got it. Okay. Airlineweekly.com. If you're not already a subscriber, go to airlineweekly.com/subscribe to get a free trial issue. And a reminder that as an Airline Weekly subscriber, you get access to all the airline news on Skift. Our great team across the region and beyond is keeping Skift.com up to date with the various daily news elements from the Middle East and elsewhere. Plus, you get Skift Research's airline reports as well. So loads of value there. airlineweekly.com/subscribe. Thanks to Jay for joining me this week. Thanks as always to our producers, John, Monica, and Will, and wherever you are in the world. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please remember to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.